All right, we want to make sure we're doing this correctly. It is our first time at the rodeo here at SFSU. Making sure if you can hear me, throw some emotes in chat. I see some waving. I see some hearts. I'd imagine that means that we are good to get started. All right. Hello out there, everyone on Twitch, and welcome to our first segment of Play It Forward, our new and exciting venture benefiting the senior class gift of 2021. My name is Brendan. I work for San Francisco State University, and I'm thrilled at the opportunity to be your presenter for our first block of programming tonight. We have assembled some great talent to cover 3 of the biggest games we've played in the past year. Later tonight, we have our very own President Mahoney playing Among Us with some of the graduating senior class. And before that, we have an interview with Darren Korb, resident composer and audio director of Supergiant Games, creators of the smash hit Hades. But up first, as you may have already been able to guess, is the Animal Crossing block. Even if you don't play Animal Crossing, I'm sure you've heard plenty of things about the global phenomenon, from Tom Nook to turnip stock prices. But what you may not have known about this series is that it has an extensive catalog of bugs, fish, and other sea creatures. And Animal Crossing New Horizons gives you the opportunity to experience all of these animals in a fully realized museum. We're here today for a walking tour of the New Horizons Aquarium. Now, I'm no expert on technology over here. I just know how to use an Animal Crossing fishing rod. So I'm glad to be hosting this with someone over here who really knows a lot of fascinating facts about aquatic life. Joining us today via Zoom is Emily McFarland, a grad student here at San Francisco State University. Emily, why don't you unmute on Zoom and tell everyone a little bit about yourself and your graduate studies here at SFSU.
Hello everyone, I am thrilled to be here with you tonight. I came here to SFSU straight from my undergrad at the University of Washington in Seattle. I came here to work with Dr. Karen Crow-Sanchez to study fish evolution. Specifically, I'm studying the development of some specialized mouth parts in a special group of stingrays. I'll get to that a little bit more later.
Absolutely. We're excited to hear a little bit more special talk about your ray studies in a little bit more detail, but thank you for telling everyone a little bit more about you at home, Emily. Before we step inside the museum, we want to thank you at home for being with us tonight. Each year, our graduating senior class chooses a charitable cause for the senior class gift, and this year they have chosen SFSU's Hope Crisis Fund. The Hope Crisis Fund is an emergency fund designed for students most in need that would be at risk of losing their chance at education. And in the past year, this fund has become more important than ever in keeping students on track to graduation. We have some great incentives throughout the night, and we'll have Nisha, our voice of God, to tell us what those are and to keep us updated throughout the night on how we're doing. Nisha, why don't you say hi to everyone at home and tell them how they can make their donation count tonight, as well as enter a chance for a raffle for a Gator swag bag.
Hello everyone, my name is Nisha. I will be your voice of God tonight. We will be putting some links out in the chat. Feel free to click those to learn more about the 2021 Hope Crisis Fund and how you can celebrate the class of 2021. Our goal is to reach 100 donors. Currently, we are at 25, so definitely a gift of any size makes a huge difference to all of our students. With that, I will send it back to you, Brendan.
Right. Thanks so much, Nisha. Now, at the end of our walking tour, we'll have some time for a question and answer session with Emily. So if you have any questions that come to mind, be sure to type them out in chat. We will have some moderators keeping an eye on the chat to make sure that our team will get passed along to me so I can pass those along to Emily. But without further ado, Emily, I think we should go ahead and proceed with the walking tour. So why don't we just go ahead into the entrance of the aquarium? And how are you tonight, Emily?
I'm doing really well. I've had a very busy day. Thursdays are always busy for me. I spent essentially all of it in the laboratory, but as tiring as it is, I'm really glad that I still get in to do research in person.
All right, thank you so much for that, Emily. Now, first up, I do know enough about fish to know that putting a betta in this tank in real life would be not a good idea. Why don't you share with us here at our freshwater exhibit a little bit more about betta fish to start?
Sure thing. Well, believe it or not, the betta does okay with some other species as tank mates. It's really just other betta fish or anything that's very small and slow that it might bully. A betta fish get very nice treatment. The betta fish is a really common aquarium species, but a lot of people don't know that it does in fact need a filter, so just keep that in mind. I always feel the need to preface my talks about the betta fish or the goldfish just with that little bit of information to make sure they get proper treatment.
Yes, we are all for
however,
spreading that kind of information here on this presentation too, is proper fish care.
they are adapted to live in smaller puddles of water that might have lower oxygen from time to time as they evolve to live in marshlands and rice paddies. They are a part of a group of fishes that has a special modified gas bladder called a labyrinth organ that allows them to gulp air and take oxygen straight from it instead of only getting it from the water. This is why it's longer than many other fishes, but it's still not ideal conditions for them. Another super interesting thing about the betta fish is that, like many fishes, they do have some limited color changing abilities. A frightened betta will display pale horizontal bars, whereas when they are flirting with each other, they'll display some pale vertical bars, and they will intensify their color when aggressive.
That's fascinating. I love that. Well, in addition to the betta in this tank, there's a couple other fish we wanted to take a look at. There's the goldfish in this tank as well, and there's a couple different varieties in here. We've got a pop-eyed goldfish and a ranchu goldfish down here that I can see. Why don't you share a little bit about goldfish?
The goldfish has been selectively bred for many centuries, starting probably over 1,000 years ago. Originally, they were fairly drab-looking. They are actually close relatives of the common carp, which you have likely seen mud on the bed of a lake. So they displayed some mutations that had a gold or orange color, and people really liked that and selectively bred them and continued to do so, and then discovered that they could breed them for these crazy traits like cute little fat bodies or googly eyes. So similar to the betta, goldfish has some adaptations. They can survive without a filter for longer than most fishes, but they also do need one. But they're adapted to survive in ponds over the winter that might freeze over, and the oxygen will eventually be depleted. They can survive in completely anoxic conditions for a short amount of time. Now, with most animals, when they no longer have oxygen, they start using anaerobic respiration. This causes a buildup of lactic acid, which is dangerous and harmful. However, instead of building up lactic acid, the goldfish is able to convert waste products to ethanol, which is then secreted from their gills, which isn't toxic to them.
Ethanol, so they're gonna power our cars.
That's one way to go about it.
Well, I think that about wraps up our time at the goldfish tank. But right back here is one of, I know for a fact, your personal favorites. We've got the salmon here in the river tank. Why don't you share, Emily, a little bit
Yeah,
more about
salmon are really special fishes. A lot of people don't really recognize it because they're so prevalent. You know, we eat salmon all the time, just salmon. But I actually took an entire class just about salmon, and I'm sure there's still a ton that I don't know. Most people know that they are anadromous, which means that they spend part of their life in the freshwater and part of their life in the saltwater. They hatch in fresh, then migrate out to the ocean, then back to the freshwater to spawn. Now, the way they do this, scientists are fascinated by it because there's so many complexities to it. They are born knowing. They don't have the ability to learn from past spawns because they are almost entirely what's called semiparous, which means that they die immediately after spawning. This allows them to put all of their energy into spawning. So they stop eating. They migrate to freshwater. And they have a bit of a programming that makes it so that when they arrive at the spawning grounds, they all have the same body fat percentage. And somehow the salmon are able to know when exactly to stop eating.
The
in
fact
order
that they
to arrive at the spawning
instinctually can
ground.
tell that along their journey, I am inspired that we don't know that.
It's incredible.
There's so many amazing things about science that we just kind of shrug and say, we don't really know why that is.
But don't worry, there are plenty of fish biologists who are working very hard to uncover all of the mysteries of the salmon.
Well, now right down this way, I have to admit, over here to the right is probably my favorite classification in the whole aquarium. Now, when we were setting up for our tour, we asked Emily what you might call this tank, and you said this would be our monster fish tank. So why don't you tell everyone at home what qualifies as a monster fish?
Yeah, sure thing. So they're not called monster fish because they are particularly vicious or anything. It's more of a colloquial term used in the aquarium hobby to refer to a number of large, typically freshwater fishes that are a bit of a trophy fish. They don't tend to actually do that well in captivity because you need massive tanks like this in order to support them because their natural habitats are huge rivers. It's often frowned upon and even illegal to keep some of these fishes, but others have extensive hobby communities, like the arowana, for example, here, the bright orange one. They even have shows for them, like dog shows. They're very highly prized fishes.
I'm loving that along the way in this journey, we're learning about all the different types of fish that were bred for exotic features, much like chickens or pigeons back in the Victorian era. Now, this tank houses one of everyone's most feared tiny fish, who's really kind of trying to make a move on me right now, the piranha. Now, should we really be frightened of this little guy?
Truth be told, you really shouldn't. Granted, that one piranha species has one of the strongest bites known to vertebrates relative to body mass. However, they're not quite the monsters most people think. They're actually omnivores, and they rarely cause serious injuries when they do bite people. It's often small, single bites to fingers or toes. Piranhas aren't actually drawn to the scent of blood. What they're attracted to is frantic splashing, and they're unlikely to attack in a big group unless they're desperate and starving. Reports of things like cows being rapidly skeletonized by piranhas come from instances where schools were blocked off from food sources. There's a famous account out there, witnessed by Theodore Roosevelt, where he reported seeing a cow completely skeletonized, but this actually was an intentional display created as a spectacle by the fishermen, who starved the piranhas and then presented them with a cow to show off how crazy they were.
Like, we're really gonna impress Teddy over here with our extra hungry piranha. Now, personally, being a little greedy here, I'd like to hear a little more about the arapaima, this gigantic beast that's lurking its way around the back of the tank right now. Is it true that this is one of the largest freshwater fish in the world?
It is. They can sometimes reach lengths over 8 feet long. This is a true monster in the sense that they're just really big and spectacular and unique. They're very well armored. They have these special scales that are composed of layers of collagen fibers with a hard mineralized outer layer. It makes the scales extremely tough but flexible, which allows them to be highly armored without losing mobility. This has historically been a constraint on fishes, as many of the extinct armored fishes ended up being outcompeted because they couldn't move fast enough, and super flexible things like sharks were able to outcompete them for food. Now, this fish is actually a relative of the betta fish. They also have the labyrinth organ, which allows them to gulp air if necessary. Beautiful and unique.
Beautiful and slightly intimidating. They definitely earn their title of monster
Only
fish.
a little bit.
All right. Well, that wraps up our time at the monster tank. Our next 2 exhibits are just to the right of us through this entryway. All right. We'll be back to this room we're entering right here for the open ocean tank. But while we make our way over to the deep sea tank, this would be a terrific time for an update from Nisha. Nisha, why don't you tell us how donations are looking? Terrific. Thank you so much, Nisha, for that update. Now, being a little biased here, this has always been one of my favorite sections at the aquarium. The deep sea tank, where we get to see some of the strangest denizens of the deep. Over here to my right, we have the Nautilus, which I have to admit, I find it a little cute. Emily, why don't you share with everyone a little bit more about the Nautilus?
Sure thing. So the Nautilus is close relative of octopuses, squids, and cuttlefish, although they're much more primitive. They've been looking about the same way since the Devonian era, which is when the first vertebrate crawled onto land. So they've been kicking around for a long time. Their full extended common name is the chambered nautilus, which is a reference to the chambers within its shell that it can actually fill with gas or water and then change the proportions of that to control its buoyancy. They look really similar to another extinct animal called the ammonites, which have been extinct since the event that killed off the dinosaurs. The ammonites, which some of them got huge, like the size of small cars, they were driven to extinction by the extreme ocean acidification from the impact that killed the dinosaurs. So this depleted all the plankton in the shallow water, which was the main food source for the ammonites. But the deeper dwelling nautilus was able to avoid this and is still around today.
I do have to admit, I'm a little biased. I think the Nautilus is pretty adorable, particularly the way that it travels along the ocean floor. It really looks like a little spaceship, the way it kind of putters air out.
I think they're cute too.
All right. Well, we have some fascinating facts about this little creature who is swimming its way around right here, the barrel-eyed fish. Why don't you tell us a little about the barrel-eye, Emily?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite deep-sea fishes. So the barrel eye has very unique eyes called tubular eyes. You can see those bright green orbs. They're actually set entirely within the head, so they have a completely transparent membrane covering them. This allows them to rotate the eyes within their head so they can look straight up above them or right in front of them. This complete encasement also protects the eyes. The barrel eye is thought to steal food from what are called siphonophores, which are these giant colonial relatives of jellyfish that have really long tentacles. So they're able to go grab things right out of those stinging tentacles without potentially damaging their eyes.
Ah, got it. So, mucous membrane, it's not just for decoration and fashion. Yes, fish are friends, not food, as we have in the chat. Now, we were going around the aquarium together, sharing some of our favorite facts when deciding what was going to make the roster. And everyone loves the anglerfish, but you really had some amazing facts about the anglerfish that we should definitely share with the audience tonight.
Yeah, the anglerfish is another one of my favorites to talk about. So looking at this anglerfish, we can tell that this is a female just by looking at it from a distance. The anglerfish has an extremely unique and strange form of reproduction called sexual parasitism. They exhibit extreme sexual dimorphism, where the males are just a tiny fraction of the size of the females. They don't have this big lure, they don't have much except for these big nostrils. So when they reach maturity, the first thing they do is use their big noses to sniff out the pheromones of a female. They'll find in most species, they will bite down and then never let go. They fuse to her, and most of their organs dissolve, their circulatory systems become intertwined, and the male essentially becomes a functional pair of testes that the female can then use to fertilize her own eggs whenever she wants. A female can have multiple males. The record, at least that somebody has written down and taken note of, is 8 males on one female anglerfish.
Relatable content. Now, we have one big behemoth that is swimming its way around right in front of us, too. And I actually practiced this one. You helped me on this. Why don't we tell the audience about the coelacanth?
Perfect pronunciation. The coelacanth is what we call a living fossil. We saw evidence of this fish in the fossil record, and it's existed more or less unchanged in appearance for about 400 million years. We thought this fish was extinct until it was rediscovered in the late 1930s in a fish market. It is a lobe-finned fish, so if you get a close look at its fins, it's got these fleshy lobes that all of its rays branch off of, and it uses those kind of like a big paddle to swim. So, technically, all tetrapods, including us, they're the vertebrates with 4 legs, or that come from an ancestor with 4 legs, so a snake is still technically a tetrapod. It's all these little quirks of phylogeny. So this might sound weird to think about, but being a lobe-finned fish, the coelacanth is more closely related to us than it is to, say, the anglerfish or the barrelfly.
Of all the fish we have in the aquarium, this one doesn't instill the most confidence in myself that this is the closest relative that we've got in the aquarium.
Oh, there are closer ones.
Well, some days you wake up feeling like a salmon, some days you wake up feeling like a coelacanth.
Coelacanth is a huge evolutionary success story. I mean, if it hasn't changed, if it's still kicking after 400 million years, that thing is pretty hardy. I think we should be proud to be related to the coelacanth.
That's such a good point, Emily. I will take your positive notes of inspiration. All right, before we leave the deep sea tank, this is one of my personal favorites. What a great name. I know I keep saying my favorites, but in the deep sea tank, they're all my favorites. But let's talk a bit about the vampire squid. What a great name.
Yeah, so I am a fish biologist. I'm not an invertebrate biologist, but when it comes to cephalopods, everybody's a little bit of an invertebrate biologist. The vampire squid is super fun, in part just because its name is so cool. I mean, vampire squid sounds cool enough on its own, but when you look at its scientific name, it literally translates to vampire squid from hell. Which, it might not look like it right now, but when feeling defensive, these guys lift their tentacles up above their head. And the inside they're covered in these spikes. So you can see that their arms are all connected by this membrane. So they become this big spiky sack that doesn't look very appealing to
like a demonic umbrella, almost.
Yeah, just like that.
Well, we've learned a little bit about not angering the vampire squid. I think that's all we wanted to take a look at the deep sea tank. So let's go ahead and over to the open ocean tank. All right, Emily, you go ahead and head to the back and position yourself in one of those portholes. This is one of the camera shots we had to practice a few times. So while I'm doing this, we realized that Nisha was accidentally muted during our last call from the voice of God. So, Nisha, why don't you chime in and tell us a little how we're looking donations-wise?
Hi, everyone. Sorry about that on the last announcement, but yes, we have hit 30 donors. Thank you so much, Genevieve Benner, Charlene Del Muro, David Fierberg, Meredith Welch, Philip Schulze, Ken Mashiro, and Nicole Lang for your very generous gifts to the senior class of 2021. Definitely click on one of those links floating around in the chat to make your gift and learn more about the Hope Crisis Fund. I'll be back later tonight with some more updates, but in the meantime, I'll give it back to Brendan.
Yes, and I have to admit, that is very exciting. We had a secret goal of 30 donations that we were trying to hit. We had an incentive we were trying to hit for a live musical performance from Darren Korb. So that'll be very exciting coming up in our next hour. Thanks for that update, Nisha. All right, now that we're here in our open ocean tank, this is home to some of the most famous fish of the sea. We've got the great white shark swimming right by our portholes right now. So let's kick off with a couple facts about these sharks we've got here. Let's start with the great white.
Sure thing. So the great white is another fish that gets a pretty bad reputation for being bloodthirsty, when the truth is that the great white shark isn't interested in human blood. No sharks are. We are not on the typical diet for sharks. So they're not drawn to the way we smell. That you might get bit by mistake, but That's unlikely. They don't like the way we taste. That's why you hear about people getting bitten and not really eaten. Occasionally a tiger shark might swallow something because they have very generalist diets and have been found with things like license plates in their stomachs. But with most sharks, they're just not interested. They don't like us. The great white, unfortunately for us, is a very curious animal, and like your average toddler, it likes to explore its environment with its mouth. It has been seen giving test bites to things like buoys because it wants to know what it is. But when you're a person and a great white shark decides to give you a test bite, it doesn't usually go so well for us. But the point is that the great white doesn't want to eat you, and if you take safety precautions, you're really, really unlikely to ever have a bad encounter with one.
Now, I've heard that a lot of shark attacks happen, and this is theory, not proof. We haven't interviewed any sharks, but I've heard that sharks often mistake surfers who are on their surfboards because it looks similar to a seal. You've got a large middle, looks like a body portion, and paddling limbs and arms.
Yeah, it's cases of mistaken identity like that, but then the shark bites and tastes you, and you are not what it thought you were, and usually leaves. So there aren't many ways to truly 100% safeguard against this, but it always helps to not go into the ocean when the water is murky, when there's just been a storm, when the wildlife is behaving strange, and never go alone, because if you've got somebody out there and you do get bitten, your chances of surviving are much greater if you have somebody to help you out.
We're not only learning proper fish care, we're learning safety for ourselves too, and that's truly important. Before we press on, why don't we take a look at this big swarm we've got in the middle? Why don't we talk a little about the anchovies? Not just for pizza, if you are very divisive.
So the anchovy is a close relative of fishes like sardines and herrings, and they're all schooling fish that need to communicate with each other, and these guys have a pretty unique way of doing it. They use something called fast repetitive ticks, which we use an acronym, FRT, pronounced out loud as fart, which is a pretty accurate term for it, as they make these sounds by emitting gas bubbles through the anus. It is not like human flatulence, which is related to digestion, because studies have shown that eating or not eating has nothing to do with the production of these farts. They only do them at night, so we believe that it is how they communicate and stay together as a school when they can't see.
Why we always love talking to marine biologists. They have the best acronyms and the best knowledge about obscure reproductive trivia, we'll just say. We've got some fun facts coming up your way about that. But I just really appreciate that there's a bunch of marine biologists who, with a straight face, said, yes, we're calling these farts because they are farts. FRT.
We love finding funny ways to name things. When you first start out, when you're first breaking into your career, you need to be taken seriously. So you got to give things, real serious names. But once you're on your 100th publication, then you're well respected. Then
After
you can
the
start
8th or
having a
9th
little
paper,
fun.
You can drop a couple innuendo.
See how long your CV is. Then you can start to get fun with it.
All right, well, one more in this tank before we press on. We have the Sunfish, this gigantic behemoth making its way around the top of the tank. What about this huge guy?
Oh, I love this fish. So the sunfish, or mola mola, is often considered to be the most derived of all fishes. And by that, we mean that it has changed the most since the evolutionary origin of fishes, which is pretty obvious when you look at it. You don't really see anything else that looks like that.
It almost looks like one cell.
It kind of does. It or something that's been bitten in half. It's kind of like the front half of a shark. But these guys are super weird. To sustain this huge body as adults, they only eat jellyfish, which is shocking because these things are, by weight, the biggest bony fish of them all. They got their name, the sunfish, because they will lay on their side at the surface and allow birds to land on them and pick parasites out of their thick, dense skin. But the more fun part of that
What,
is
that's
that
not the
their
most fun part?
larvae, it is not. Their larvae, which they produce about 400 million of at once, look like tiny cartoon suns. Didn't even know this when we started calling them sunfish. So imagine how delighted the first scientists were when we looked at these things under a microscope and saw that they were like little spiky cartoon suns.
Well, much like Bob Ross, I think a lot of scientists appreciate happy little accidents.
I know I sure do. My life is enhanced by knowing this.
Absolutely. Now, why don't we go ahead and head out of the open ocean tank? We're going to head to the left over here, and we're going to go to our little jellyfish pit stop. And as we're setting up, we have time for another update from our voice of God, Nisha. How are we looking, Nisha?
Hello, everyone. So we got another gift in during Emily's great update. So we are now at a total of 31 donors, which brings our grand total up to $1,161 for the class of 2021. A gift of any size can make a huge difference for our students, so please follow one of those links in the chat, and I'll be back later.
Thank you so much, Nisha. All right, here we are at our little jellyfish pit stop. Single-celled organisms, but they always seem to capture our interest. What can you tell us about jellyfish, Emily?
Well, first, the jellyfish is actually not a single-celled organism, although they are very simple.
They're not. Thank you for correcting me.
They're very simple when compared to many other things. They don't have a centralized nervous system like our brains, although many do have fairly complex eyes, which is something I actually only learned recently.
I did not know that at all.
It's super cool. Unfortunately, you see some of the most complex jellyfish eyes on boxed jellyfish, so it's not super nice to imagine that some of the most deadly jellyfish can see the best, but at least they're not coming for you on purpose, as far as we know. But the jellyfish is super unusual because of its life history strategy. They have kind of two modes of reproduction that they cycle throughout their lives, or throughout their life. They have an asexual phase that starts when they are a larva, and then this larva settles onto the ocean floor. And then it kind of grows into this stalk, which then produces, via asexual reproduction, a bunch of smaller jellyfish, like we see here. This is the true adult final jellyfish form. And then, as an adult jellyfish, they can reproduce sexually to create these larvae that then settle, and the cycle goes on.
Amazing.
They have options.
The circle of life. We love it. We're going to pass right by this tank here, because we're going to head right up here to one of the most gorgeous tanks in the aquarium. We're going to the coral reef tank. Now, right up front, we have an unassuming little creature here, the Mantis Shrimp, which is just such a fascinating little creature. Why don't you share a little bit more about the Mantis Shrimp, Emily?
Yeah, this is another just really awesome invertebrate that I feel, as a marine biologist, I almost have a duty to know things about it, even though I study fishes, because it's just so cool. I mean, it's beautiful to look at, even. So, you may have heard that the mantis shrimp can see way more colors than we can, because they have 12 types of photoreceptors compared to the human 3. However, this has actually been debunked. They do have 12 types of photoreceptors, but they function differently than those of the vertebrate eye. The mantis shrimp's eyes are actually less sensitive to color than ours. They're still incredible animals. There are many other things I could talk about, but first I want to talk about how strong they are.
Mm-hmm.
They have these powerful front appendages, and they've actually been known to break aquarium glass. Just for reference, if we could extend our arms at 1/10 of the force of the mantis shrimp, we could launch a baseball into orbit.
So we should work on our bicep curls? Is that what you're saying?
I think we should work on becoming mantis shrimp.
I think that's the better course of action. I don't want to do
I
any
think
bicep
that's the
curls.
way to go. I mean, I'd like to look like that.
Oh yeah, color scheme, strength, all of the above. Before we press on to our final tank, Emily, we are going to skip a couple of the fish in the coral reef tank because we're getting close-ish on time. But there's one unassuming little creature. You knew this was coming, but the audience at home did not. Why don't you share probably arguably our most fascinating fact of the day? Tell us about the flatworm.
Sure thing. I would love to talk about the flatworm. Now, it may seem like marine biologists have a lot of fun facts about reproduction, and we do. But the ocean is different, and the animals in it have had to get creative when it comes to reproduction because they're reproducing in a different environment with different challenges and constraints. Now, flatworm is what we call a simultaneous hermaphrodite, meaning it has the biological facilities to produce both sperm and eggs at the same time. They do not self-fertilize. They do always find a partner, and when they do, they engage in something that scientists have dubbed penis fencing. Now, it's easier and less costly, energy-wise, to act as the male in these meetings because then you don't have to expend any of your energetically costly eggs. You just get to go off and continue on your flatworm life. So both flatworms want to be the male, so they work very hard and engage in a battle to stab each other with their penises. And whichever one stabs the other first gets to be the male, whereas the other one gets stuck carrying the eggs.
Now, if there's a simultaneous stabbing, is there a third flatworm on duty to play referee?
I actually don't know what would happen in that case.
We'll wait with cameras and bated breath for the day that we find out when that happens. But we figured you'd know some facts at home, but we didn't think you'd know about flatworm penis fencing. All right, let's head down to our final tank of the night, the shallow ocean tank. Now, the first thing I want to share, I'm going to set up the camera here, and then we'll go down to this unassuming little organism that's clustered down here on this rock. Why don't we share a little bit about the sea pineapple?
Yeah, so the sea pineapple is a tunicate. And they don't look much like us, but they're actually more closely related to us than something you might think of as more complex that you might assume would be closer related to us, like a lobster or an octopus. Tunicates are actually chordates, which means they have a notochord, but they're not vertebrates, so they don't have a spine. So you can't really see the resemblance as an adult, but when you look at the larval stage and compare it to our early development, the similarities become clear. As a larva...
Again, Emily, the coelacanth and the sea pineapple. We are not leaving people feeling all that inspired.
I feel inspired.
Okay, I'll go with yours.
when they become adults, they lose their notochord. Their brain that they develop becomes more or less useless. You can cut it out, and the tunicate will be fine. They're fascinating. It's fascinating that along the road to evolving the spine, we got so many of the organisms with more complex body plans. But selection also favors simplicity. It's kind of a common misconception that evolution progresses from simple to complex, when that really isn't always true. Sometimes simplicity prevails. Some things find how to do it, and they do it really well, and then they just go unchanged for millions and millions of years, keeping it simple.
Good.
Just
If it
another
ain't broke, evolve so you don't have to fix it.
Just a little anecdotal story. They actually eat these things in some parts of the world, like in Japan. I had the chance to try sea pineapple in Japan. I thought it was terrible. It's like chewy chemicals. It does not taste good at all. But interesting that people do look at these things and think, oh, we could eat this.
I think people have tried to eat Stranger Things. At least it has pineapple in the name. Now, we had it swarming around. I see it over here in the corner. It's hiding right now. There it comes out. The lionfish. One of the most beautiful fish in the shallow ocean tank. Why don't you tell us a little about the lionfish?
The lionfish has a pretty bad reputation right now because it is invasive in the Caribbean due to repeated releases from people who got one for their aquarium, and then it ate everything in their tank, and they didn't want it anymore, so they thought, oh, I can just let it go in the ocean because they don't want to have to kill it.
Famous
But
destructive words.
enough people did this that they were able to establish a population, and because they're not native to the Caribbean, natural predators and the prey items aren't evolved to avoid these things. So they've done an amazing job depleting the native fauna, sometimes even before we can discover it. My undergraduate advisor actually even published a paper that described an account of these lionfish in the Caribbean eating a species that was brand new, we were just discovering as the lionfish was eating it. They use these big fan-like fins to corral them, and then they snap. Another interesting thing about them is that they are extremely venomous. They have these cool spines along their dorsal fin on the back, which function like hypodermic needles. They're hollow, and at the base, they have a poison sac. And when you put pressure on the spine, it puts pressure on this venom gland, which makes the venom shoot through the spine. So they're pretty formidable creatures, also very tasty. If you go to the Caribbean anytime soon, try to eat as much lionfish as you possibly can.
That's sage advice. Not only are we teaching people proper fish care, we're going to teach you which fish to go eat. All right, Emily. We've got time for one more before we go to questions, and we know somewhere swimming around here. I see it. It's normally hanging out on the side of the tank. It's the ray. Why don't you tell us some of your favorite facts about the fish you're studying?
Yeah, of course. So this ray is not a member of the group I'm examining specifically, which is the family called Myliobatidae, which taxonomy is debatable, and one thing you learn is that there are constant disagreements about taxonomy in the world of biology. But for our study, we are considering Myliobatidae to encompass eagle rays, and they're close relatives to bat rays, cow-nose rays, and the manta ray was a classic example. What I am studying specifically are their specialized mouth parts. So I'm sure you can all imagine what a manta ray looks like. There's some called devil rays because they have these quote-unquote horns projecting out around their mouths. Now these are called the cephalic lobes. Now these are also present in the cow-nose rays and the bat rays, although less conspicuous. Now, they were thought to perhaps be a third set of functional appendages. So essentially another set of limbs, which would be completely unheard of in vertebrates. I'm sure you cannot think of a single vertebrate that has three paired functional appendages. Now, some preliminary work was able to demonstrate that no, not a independent set of appendages. They are actually modifications of the pectoral fins, so like the wing of the ray, which is homologous to our arms. So during development, we can see that there's this splitting of the anterior portion of their pectorals, and split off portion develops and becomes the cephalic lobe. So my research is trying to identify exactly what gene is responsible for the splitting off of the cephalic lobe. They're still super unique, even though they are not a third set of appendages, because we don't really know of any examples of this kind of functional partitioning of a limb in other vertebrates, where during development, limb splits into two, and then those two parts are used for something completely different. One for feeding, one for locomotion.
Got it.
So they're really awesome, and I'm super excited about my research. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to work on this project.
And you get to spend a lot of time with embryos nowadays.
I do. I spent like 8 hours today with embryos.
We appreciate you tearing yourself away from that in order to impart such amazing knowledge on us today. So that wraps up our walking tour, and we have a couple questions that showed up in chat if you wouldn't mind answering before we go on our break, Emily.
I would be happy to answer.
All right. Our first question came from Hello Marcy. Hello Marcy was wondering if you could elaborate a bit on being stung by jellyfish. Is it as bad as people say it is? Is the box jellyfish really as to be feared as we think it should be?
Yes. I mean, it depends on the jellyfish species. Some are far worse than others. Oh, well, Animal Crossing just booted me off. But I am still there in spirit and in voice. So some jellyfish are not that bad. And, you know, it's going to hurt, but you're going to be okay. But the box jellyfish is actually very serious, and you will need immediate treatment if you get stung by the box jellyfish. So the answer is, it varies. It depends. There are a lot of jellyfish out there.
All right. Our other question came from What the Lumps. Are we more related to the sea pineapple or the coelacanth? Do you have any theories yourself on that, or do we have any facts on that?
Oh, we have facts on that. We are more closely related to coelacanth because we share a more recent common ancestor. That's how you determine relatedness when it comes to like evolutionary relationships. You look at how long ago did one population split into two, and those two parts keep splitting, and eventually you get whatever two organisms you're looking at. So the more recently in evolutionary history that happened, the more closely related you are.
Closer on the tree. Got it. And our last question of the night, Aaron was wondering, have you ever been stung by a jelly?
I have not been stung by a jelly. I have been injured by a variety of marine invertebrates. Just like a month ago, I was bitten by an octopus in the field, which honestly, I'm kind of glad it happened because I know what it feels like now. And what a lot of people don't know is that we believe that all octopuses actually have some amount of venom, but the only ones known to be deadly to humans are the blue-ringed octopus and its close relatives. But I was bitten by an Eastern Pacific red octopus just on the hand. And it was, some people have reported to have had horrible reactions to this venom, where it's super painful and super swollen, and sometimes the tissue gets a little bit necrotic and they throw up and get dizzy. But
I never want to hear the word necrotic.
No. For me, it was just like a bad bee sting, and it took a really long time to heal. It only a few days ago completely healed over.
Oh my goodness. Well, Emily, I'm glad your bite is not as severe as it sounds. Nothing necrotic.
Yeah, but I mean, it was really cool to watch it heal and see, wow, the venom really does prolong healing for like a month. That's crazy.
All right, Emily, that is all we have to offer today on our walking tour of the aquarium. Thank you so much for sharing time with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity. I had a great time.
It's been wonderful. You take care and you enjoy the rest of the program. Now, When we come back, we hope you've enjoyed what you've seen today and hopefully learned some new trivia that you can pass along to your friends about the aquatic life we've covered tonight. But when we come back, we're going to take a quick break, and when we return, we'll have an exclusive interview with Darren Korb of Supergiant Games, here to talk about what it's like to design sound and music for one of the biggest smash hits of the past few years, the freshly crowned BAFTA Game of the Year, Hades. Stick around, you won't want to miss it. Thanks, everyone. And to close us out, Nisha, why don't you tell everyone at home how close... Oh, we already met our bonus goal. That's just in my script, but why don't you tell everyone how we're doing?
Hi, everyone. So first of all, thank you so much. We've been getting a pretty steady stream of gifts in during Emily's wonderful Animal Crossing lecture. We were at 34 donors for a total of $1,271. Thank you so much, Paul, Karen, Katie, Mick, and Andrea, for your generous gifts. As a reminder, we're celebrating the class of 2021, and we encourage you to make a gift of $20.21 or whatever you can to help provide essential services to our students. Learn more about the senior class gift and the Hope Crisis Fund by clicking on one of the links floating around in the chat.
Thanks so much, everybody.